Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Bahia Yaksan. I'm a diversity educator and a core alignment coach, which means I train teams and organizations to learn how to identify and disrupt patterns of bias that cause harm to everyone, and then further to develop new patterns, new attitudes that lead to more inclusive actions that make life better for everyone. And if you want to see samples of my workshops or courses, you can go to my website, knowwhatyouvantcoaching.wordpress.com. Today's episode is called We Will Dance Again with the Mayim Dance Troupe. We have 3 guests today, Maayan and Naomi and Leah. But before I fully introduce them, I want to thank our sponsor. This program is brought to you by the City of Davis Arts and Cultural Affairs Program and the California Creative Corps, a pilot program funded by the city's Sacramento's Office of Arts and Culture and the California Arts Council, a state agency, as an engagement campaign designed to increase public awareness about issues of social justice, climate resiliency, and more. The Creative Corps program, backed by Governor Gavin Newsom and the state legislature, looks to increase public awareness on topics such as health and safety, water and energy conservation, climate mitigation, emergency preparedness, social justice, and civic and community engagement. I want to now introduce Maayan and Naomi and Leah a little more fully. Maayan and Naomi both grew up in Davis, California, and both have young children. They're active members of the Israeli and Jewish communities and started the Mayim Dance Troupe in 2024. Leah is a member of the Davis Jewish community, and her son is a member of the Mayim Dance Troupe. Welcome, all 3 of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So I wanted to first, I always like to hear the origin of a project someone's or a group people have created. So can we start by you letting us know why you started the Mayim Dance Troupe?
Sure.
We can just go. Yeah.
So this is Maayan, and I will say I started this troupe in kind of a twofold reasons. So the first reason was part of my personal transformation. As an Israeli American, I've lived on various kibbutzim. So after the massacre of October 7th, I was 6 months postpartum, and I really felt a lot of fear. There was a lot of very clear messaging. There was the Day of Global Jihad just a few days after, and we were actually recommended to close our synagogue. And then I started doing some advocacy work, and I really felt like, I could be a voice in our community. And then I started going on a personal journey, connecting to my roots, learning more about Judaism and Jewish culture. So this was really part of a project of my own relearning and connecting to Israeli folk dancing as a really quintessential part of modern Jewish culture, as well as recognizing a need in our community. I was seeing that there really wasn't very many people that knew deeply about Jewish culture, neither about anti-Semitism nor about our culture as a people. So I don't know if anyone wants to add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that I grew up with a really strong background in Israeli folk dance. My parents were both folk dancers, and some of my earliest memories are of like being a toddler on the side of the folk dancing circle late at night as my parents would just dance and dance. Yeah. And of course, as a child and teen, I rebelled against that and I thought it was lame. But it's very much a part of who I am. And so I think part of my desire to join the dance troupe and my kind of attraction to it is to create spaces in the Jewish community and the Israeli American community where we can celebrate our like ethnic cultural heritage together in a positive and empowering way.
Yeah.
That's so important.
My story's a little bit different because I didn't really grow up in a lot of Jewish culture. And it's something that I've had to work really hard to incorporate into my family's life because, and Maayan sort of talked about this, like her own journey and her own spiritual journey. And I have very much felt to be on my own journey as well. And when you're a parent, that involves kind of bringing your family along as well. And so wanting to find these pieces that I can share with my children that they will find joyous and celebratory and connect in ways that sort of go beyond book learning, I guess, right? To be fully immersed in the culture. And dance and music is just, it's so universal. It sucks everybody in.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry, this is Naomi. I just wanted to add one more thing, which is that I think for myself, like following the trauma of October 7th that Maayan already mentioned, I was holding so much panic in my body, like so much fight or flight panic. And this kind of working through using our body and using movement in kind of a somatic way to move through these feelings has been huge for me.
That totally makes sense. Healing through movement and this form of art. Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing. That's, deeply personal, very painful experiences and part of your, personal transformation. And just for people listening, and for the ease of knowing who's talking, can we just continue going kind of in this order, like with Maayan and then Naomi and then Leah in the answering questions?
Sure.
Okay.
We'll try.
Yeah, or whatever. Just in case folks. We'll just let it flow. But that way I won't have to say, okay, you next, right? So what are, besides like the the response to trauma, which is completely understandable and just impacted so many people in so many ways, and the healing aspect and connecting to like roots and ancestry and sharing with your family, what else what are the goals of the dance troupe? Any additional goals you might have?
So I think this idea of connecting to the younger generations, at our first performance, there were actually 3 generations, which was really incredible. And it was really a big part of who we are as Jews, is about teaching the next generation. And there's a very interesting conversation that we had after the first performance about resisting assimilation and kind of how do we engage in society as a people, as Americans, and not lose who we are. So there were people from, many different cultures, both in the audience and in the performance. And this is something that Jews have done really well over time. And then we're finding in recent generations, probably even, I would say, just the last few decades, that there are a lot of people in the Jewish community who don't really know our history, and we don't really know what we've gone through, but also the beautiful parts, the wisdom that we have. And one thing that I really love about Jewish folk dance in particular is that it incorporates cultures from all over the world. So it's a really essential part, both of our celebrations, at weddings. It's really an important part at bar mitzvahs, even at Jewish summer camps. But it's also this beautiful thing where people from all over the world came together and could learn these dances from all different cultures. Anyone else want to add?
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
I'm sorry, but that's just like, that in and of itself is just interesting to think about. Like, all, of course, there's a whole wide spectrum. There's different sects of Judaism and a whole wide spectrum of who is Jewish and what is Jewish, and then cultural influence depending on where, right? Where you grew up and where you live. So I appreciate, just that, including cultures from all over the world. Okay. Thanks for letting me interject that.
Yeah, and I mean, Maayan put it beautifully. This is Naomi. I think part of it for me, part of the goals for me, is educating our community about who we are and where we come from, and also educating kind of the larger community we live in. Jews are only 2% of the population of the U.S. and 0.2% of the global population. And we're not a proselytizing religion. So I think historically, like, people don't know a lot about Jews, and, we're not just a religion, we're an ethno-religious tribe. And like, I think a lot of Americans relate to Jews just as a religious, just as a religion, but we're really not that. We're best understood as a tribal peoples. And after the exile from Jerusalem many thousands of years ago, Jews were really dispersed all over the world through different immigration patterns. And part of the really cool thing about Israeli folk dance is it combines Russian folk dances that Jews did in the former, Soviet Union and even prior to that. And, traditional Yemenite dances that Jews from Yemen brought with them. And just, it's a really interesting way to learn about the history of Jews in the world through an art form.
This is Maayan again. I just wanted to add also that one thing that I was realizing over this year is that if we don't tell our story, other people will. And I think this is probably true for a lot of other minorities, right? Like, we need to be the ones to tell our story. So this was another opportunity for that. So again, thank you for including us on the podcast. And I'm sure I'm not the only guest to say that we really appreciate being seen. So I think that's a really important part of what this is about as well.
Well, I appreciate y'all being here. Yes, being seen.
This is Leah now. I really resonate, with both what Maayan and Naomi said about sort of the cultural piece and the resisting assimilation and resisting other people's definitions or descriptions of you, and thinking about getting my kids involved. I think, and Naomi was talking about this in terms of the sort of tribal identity is that we Jews consider ourselves part of a peoplehood. Our identity is deeply tied within that sense of community, a small global community. And we are even smaller when you're talking about Davis, right? Davis has a really small Jewish community. And so instilling that sense of peoplehood, you have to really do it in a concerted way. It's not going to happen naturally, right? Your kids are not going to just end up with a Jewish identity by growing up in Davis. It's something that you need to immerse them in. And I want my kids to understand and connect with Jewish people and the peoplehood and Jewish identity beyond sort of walking into a synagogue, which is an important part, but a small part of who we are.
Yeah, that makes sense. All aspects, and just emphasizing it's not just a religion, it's a tribe, it's ethnicity, culture. So what else does it mean to be a part of this project? For Leah, I appreciate you mentioning children. What does it mean for your families to be a part of this project?
Did you want to?
Yeah, for me, and this is Naomi, and we're gonna go out of order because everyone's looking at me.
Oh, no problem. I just wanted people to know.
You're the one with
I just wanted people to clarify who's speaking. It doesn't matter the order. So people know.
This is Naomi, and for me, it's like really coming full circle to my family's kind of history. I mean, my parents met at an Israeli folk dancing night in New York in the 70s. And Israeli folk dance has like shaped their lives. It's probably the reason I'm here, right? And so it's like a art form that I mean, like I said, I have memories of it from an early child. When I was a teenager and I was going to summer camp, my favorite memories are folk dancing Friday night and Saturday night, the whole camp. And it's just like really coming full circle and honoring, my mom and my dad and even their parents who were folk dancing in the early days of Israel. So.
Wow, that's nice image and memories.
I guess there was one more aspect too. This is Maayan speaking. This idea of kind of grief and joy being intertwined in Judaism, that, despite the grief, despite the pain, we go forward in joy. So, at a wedding, we'll break the glass, right? The man will step on a glass and break it. We are remembering that we are not whole. We are not returned to our temple. So there are so many different aspects of the other way around too, right? Where it's been this very devastating year. Anyone connected with Israeli family, which both of us have, know someone who was lost in October 7th or the months since. And, I know that that's an experience that a lot of us have had who have family in the Middle East. And it was something that I really felt like we have this opportunity to dance again, right? We talk about the Nova Festival, which was this place where just so many young people were slaughtered. And both Naomi and I have been to parties in Israel in the desert. You know, it felt very close to home. And as we came upon the year anniversary of the October 7th massacre, there was this question of, do we celebrate, right? It was on Simchat Torah, where we dance with the Torah. And can we be joyous? Can we be joyous at such a dark time? And I think it's a really important part of who we are as Jews, that we have to continue going forward. And, you know, maybe it's not even just a Jewish thing. Maybe it's really, as human beings, we have to be able to set aside our grief and come back together. So there's also an aspect of Israeli folk dance that's a lot of it is a circle. So there was something also very healing. I think Naomi touched on that as well. There was something very healing about coming together and kind of moving as one with this in-breath and out-breath kind of gesture that was really amazing. So.
It is amazing. And that's really, really well put. Like you said, I appreciate how you touch on the universal aspect, right? Of how we can both definitely within, from your own culture and your own people and tribe, but also recognizing the need to be able to keep moving forward. And I'm just trying to be as articulate as you were. What did you say? Like, can we celebrate again? Do we celebrate again at dark times? And I think you said, as human beings, we have to set aside our grief and come together again.
Right. Yeah.
Can I piggyback on that, Maayan? This is Naomi. I was just thinking even broader about how important it is for marginalized communities to speak for themselves and show their colors and not mask, and kind of my own experience and how that relates to dance, to Israeli folk dance. I think that as a child, like any marginalized community, I definitely experienced my fair share of anti-Semitism, whether it was just even friends in my social circle making low-key anti-Semitic comments about tropes, classical anti-Semitic tropes about me being too stingy, or making Holocaust jokes even. And then, in 1999, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but in 1999, several synagogues in Sacramento were firebombed, including the one that my family went to. So I experienced, everything from just day-to-day, anti-Semitic speech from people who were supposed to have my back, to actual violence, pretty serious violence. And so I think a lot of as I grew as a teenager, I think I really leaned into masking the fact that I was Jewish, because then I just wouldn't have to deal with it, And as an adult, and as having young kids and looking at them and struggling with what Leah touched on, how am I going to pass down an identity, a Jewish identity to them that is both meaningful and joyous, and this dancing endeavor and this art form is, to me, a way to show pride in who we are, and hopefully to share something beautiful with others about who we are.
This is Leah. Everything that Naomi just said, big snaps. I totally agree with. It's, I moved around a lot as a kid. I lived in 3 different countries on 3 different continents. And it didn't matter where I lived. I always faced anti-Semitism. My synagogue was also firebombed. I went to preschool there. I was younger, but that's like a seared memory for me. And the comments from teachers, the comments from peers, Holocaust jokes. It's you hear a lot, and my kids have faced it. When we moved here, I actually didn't assume that we would face it to the same degree. And you get the microaggressions or the insensitive sort of comments, and you sort of expect that sort of a level of, maybe ignorance or, from kids, curiosity, or just trying to figure out what's what. You expect that at some level. But I didn't expect the level of anti-Semitism that my kids have faced in the schools here. Davis, I think, has such an ethos of inclusivity, one that we really gravitated to in moving here, right? That's part of the attraction of living in Davis is the community here, the bike paths, and this really wonderful community. And shortly after October 7th, and my son used to always wear a Star of David. And a kid looked at his Star of David. This was maybe November 2023. So again, shortly after October 7th. And a kid looked at him and he said, "Are you Jewish?" And then threatened to kill him when my son said yes.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Oh.
It shook my son. And he wore Star a little bit after that, and then hasn't since. And I want him to know that there is joy in being Jewish, right? Like, yes, being Jewish does come, unfortunately, in this society with anti-Semitism. It does. And so we have to prepare our kids for that. Part of raising Jewish kids is preparing them for anti-Semitism. And I know that that's not a uniquely Jewish thing, right? That's a uniquely minority identity experience of having those conversations with your kid. But it can't just be that. Otherwise, that's what Naomi was talking about, that you push back, you reject, you want to hide. Like, what is there to come to in this identity if it is just scary and hateful? Like, why step into that space? And, when I told my son about this dance troupe, I actually wasn't sure what his response was going to be. But I was so relieved that he was so excited, and all the way through, like, he just loved being a part of the dance troupe. It was something that absolutely brought him joy. He knows that, like, this is a unique cultural piece of him. This is part of his identity, and it is all mixed up in those pieces that are difficult. But it's so important that we instill those pieces of joy and pride as well. And I'm just really thankful to Maayan and Naomi for providing this experience for him.
Oh, that's so important. I'm so glad that he has this place, this community, this art form that's healing and embraces him and reflects the beauty of himself and his family and his people.
Yeah.
That's such an important. Wow, I'm sorry. I'm just appreciating how important that is.
Yeah, and you know, they're just back to my son when it got around, right? Kids hear about these things. When it got around that a kid with a Star of David was threatened, everybody knew it was my son because, as another little Jewish girl said, he's the only one brave enough to wear it.
Yeah, that says a lot. Yeah, I've seen it and heard it, and not just in schools, but yeah, I'm so sorry. What impact, and it's just hurts.
Yeah. You wanna protect your kids, but there's only so much that you can do.
Well, I'll just talk about that a little bit too, because that was a really big part of my own transformation, was actually, well, just going back to my upbringing. So I grew up in Davis, and I don't really remember facing a lot of anti-Semitism in the traditional sense. I overheard a Holocaust joke some kids were saying outside an elementary school, but I don't really remember a lot of overt incidents other than hearing about the fire bombings in Sacramento. So I was always nervous in the synagogue, but what I did experience was a lot of anti-Zionism. So it was a really interesting process that I feel like I've been learning about a lot over the past year, where it got to the point where people would ask me where my name is from, and I would say that it's Hebrew because I didn't want to say it's Israeli. And it's not a biblical name. It is specifically a new kind of nature hippie Israeli name. That it was such a hot button issue for so many people growing up in Davis and going to university in Santa Cruz. I just learned sometimes it was easier to avoid it. And that was something, there was one incident where I was applying to a housing co-op and it was going wonderfully. And then they found out that I had done some volunteer work in Israel and very quickly showed me out the door. So there was, there were a few incidents where it was very clearly not about my politics, because my politics have always been very left, very progressive. It really was specifically about my identity as an Israeli American. And I found that over the last year, especially people who are kind of politically progressive have faced such an upheaval of loss of friendships, loss of community, people who have disabilities feeling unsafe there, people who are in the queer, LGBTQ communities really facing a lot of isolation. On the back of all of these anti-Semitic events that we were hearing about, there was also the personal loss and experience of isolation. So I've actually become friends with both Naomi and Leah over the last, whatever it is, a year and a half almost, since October 7th, where I really recognized that I can be a part of these spaces that make me feel safe and make me feel welcome. I guess the other thing that I wanted to add was this fear that I mentioned earlier, where I just felt so much hate. I felt so much aggression. There was actually a number of messages that we should be fearful, that we should, there was a professor at UC Davis, or an assistant professor, who said that we have addresses and children, and we should fear our bosses, but we should fear them more. That was about Zionists. So it was really like a lot of messaging around violence and hate. And I was really shocked when those messages weren't countered in our communities. And that was something that I just really feel like it's so important that we stand up against bigotry and hate, no matter who it's directed at. Let me see. I'm sorry. I'm trailing into too many different thoughts. I have a lot to say on the matter.
Oh no.
So the last thing that I wanted to say was that it was very important to me. Like, we were talking about how it's important that we define ourselves and not let other people define us. So one thing that I really had no idea how prevalent misinformation about the Jewish people are. So one thing that I've really been recognizing is that people think that there are multiple definitions for Zionism, but actually only the Jewish people get to define Zionism, right? Only Zionists get to define who they are, right? So this is something that I feel like people are creating false definitions and then categorizing Zionists as something to be hated. So I just wanted to define Zionism for a second, if that's all right. It's the belief of wanting Israel to exist as a Jewish state and supporting the existence of the Jewish state. It has nothing to do with the policies. It has nothing to do with current events. I think, especially for those of us who are progressive, there's a huge range in what we think about what's happening. It just simply means that we think that we have a right to, and not even just Jews, right?
Well, it's a right to self-determination in our ancestral lands, and it's not a zero-sum belief.
Right,
so
exactly.
it's not a belief that there shouldn't be a Palestinian state. It doesn't opine as to what the borders of Israel should be or should look like. It's just a belief that Jews have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homelands, just like everyone else. And it doesn't, institute someone's indigeneity as being more important than another people's at all. I mean, so many people are indigenous to that piece of land.
Right. So when other people start putting alternative definitions, it's really hard. Like, I had a parent in my daycare ask me, "Are you a Zionist?" And I was like, "I'm not sure what it is that you've heard." Right. So that was something that I've really just been kind of slapped in the face this year with this idea of, like, everyone thinks that they get to define, and really we need to ask people who identify. I don't know if you have a better kind of anti-bias way of explaining that, but I feel like, we really need to let people define themselves and speak for themselves. Anyway.
Yeah, it's been this Naomi again. It's been like super perturbing for me to see in all of these like amazing creative spaces that I have been a part of, like places in the university where signs have gone up that say no homophobes, no racists, no Zionists. And it's equating Zionism with those terms. And it's just so disheartening to see other people try to kind of co-opt how we define our own belief system as Jews and then weaponize it against us. And I think part of it is just this lack of education too, where people don't know a lot about Jews. Like, a lot of people can't even point to Israel on a map, and yet it's this hot button issue. And so it's so important, I think, for all of us to just like take a beat, take a pause, like, be civil, remember how to engage, Like, we're trying to have a society.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I just wanted to say again how much I appreciate this podcast, because there's really so few spaces to engage with people that we don't necessarily agree with. And I feel like there's so many things that we agree about, right? There's so many shared values. And really having an opportunity to listen to someone that you might not listen to otherwise, or to speak in a space that, you know, even at the art fest when we were performing, one of the teenagers said, I'm really scared. Like, there's really folk dancing. Is there going to be protesters? Is someone going to come? It was not political. It was just the term. So I think it's really appreciated to have these spaces where we can just kind of just talk together again and answer questions. And, you know, I think, you know, cancel culture is another issue where people are so scared to ask the wrong question. They're so scared to use the wrong, that they just end up not talking. And I think it's really important that we have opportunities like this where we can talk again.
Yes, our brains freeze up so many times and conversations don't happen. And that's why I think, and I know, conversations are so important, because I mean, we know that teaching history in the United States has been very lacking and very narrow, and you know, thank God that it's getting better over time in some schools, in some places, but we've always had a problem with ignorance, and of course misinformation is like 1,000 times worse, more and ongoing now. But I just think every conversation is it's so important to every conversation. It's so helpful to, like, what does that word mean to you? Like, what's my definition? What's your definition? What's my understanding? What's your understanding? And usually, if we're, like, you know, actually present and opening our hearts, we're learning more. Like, okay, well, that's not what I was told, or that's not what I learned, or that's not what I thought. And you know, and frankly, I have heard a number of definitions of Zionism, and I just feel like, as you know, as I hope my listeners know, for me, it's about cultivating understanding, and it might be like in a dialogue with someone, like conversation 3. I'm like, that's not. I don't think that. I don't agree. Like, that's okay. But if you're, like, one thing I remember learning from the I used to teach from Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication. One thing I remember, a principle I remember from that book years ago, was what's more important to you, to be right or to connect.
Right.
And it doesn't mean we don't want to learn or grow or be clear about what my experience is of whatever we're talking about. Of course, I want to be able to convey what I think and what I feel, and what you think and what you feel. But I think it's building relationship, and in the process of understanding each other, there's moments where, like, I might not think the same thing, but that's, of course, we're not carbon copies of each other. We grew up in different families.
There might also be opportunities for you to be like, when you say that, this is what I hear. Can you clarify? And if we're not engaging with someone who disagrees with us, when are we ever given that opportunity, right? Even just to have that echo of just like, oh, I didn't realize that's what you were hearing, right? Let me be more specific. Let me give you an example, right? And that's something that I think is really important too, is being aware of the messaging. Like, we have a lot of issues on social media where we're getting these echo chambers, especially with AI, right? We're kind of getting these echo chambers of what we think the other thinks about us and what we think the other thinks we think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important to have those actual in-person conversations. Just be like, wait a second, let's clarify that. Let's break that down a little bit, and not lumping together the other.
Yeah,
Right? Adding room for nuance.
And that's making me remember. I think it was my first phone conversation with you, Leah, when we were talking about how our like society at large has pits people together, right? The divide and conquer, and don't get to know the other person because we want to have, if you work collectively and together, you might create peace instead of giving a small select authoritarian government control. And we have authoritarian governments in several places in the world. But you and I were talking about, we were through the culture, Arab people and Jewish people are supposed to not get to know each other.
Yeah.
And how like that's so unfair and so harmful and so hurtful and destructive for everybody. And how do we step out of that norm? Well, we get to know each other. When we have, and I'm sorry, I just want to add one more thing. We also acknowledge that for the most part, I don't know how much, for the most part, I grew up in this country. For the most part, I grew up and lived and was able to have the privilege of not being in a war zone and being safe. And I remember you and I said, a privilege of being safe and not shot at, not bombed, not being in a context of war and violence constantly. It's not only we have the privilege of reaching out and trying to connect and develop relationships and understand where each other's coming from. Do you want to add to that, Leah? Do you remember that conversation?
Yeah, I just, our society is so incredibly polarized in this, we exactly what you were saying of just pushing us away from each other. And I think that erodes at our democracy if we're not able to sit and work through hard things together. Then it will be, fascist or authoritarian takeover, right? Like if you cannot work together as a society, then it will just be one side strong arming the other side. Our democracy depends on being able to connect and work together. And I think that anti-Semitism in particular breeds in this space of societal conflict and polarization, because a lot of anti-Semitism can just be boiled down to conspiracy theory, the all-powerful Jew that is the source of all of your problems, right? That's sort of the myth of anti-Semitism, which is why it's so appealing on both ends of all ends of the political spectrum. And when we see this rise in polarization, we see this rise in anti-Semitism, which I know you were not going in that direction, so I apologize. I took it a different direction, but no, I think what you were saying is that in all sorts of factions and places in society, we're not connecting. I mean, socioeconomically, we're incredibly segregated, and so many spaces.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off because we have only 1 minute. It just like flew by. I'm sorry. And also, that we learn different histories. Like we also talked about, like there are different histories about the Middle East, and so let's talk about them.
Right.
So I'm sorry, you guys have just a few seconds to say your closing thought. So do you want to start with Maayan?
Sure. I just, again, wanted to thank you for this. I think it was a really important conversation, and I really hope there will be more. I hope, I don't know if your listeners are mostly local, but I really hope that people start reaching out, whether it's online or in person, and start reaching out. You know, I've actually had a number of people in the Arab community come and talk about how similar their dances are to the dances that we were doing, right? Like, even among people who we feel so divided at this particular time, we can still find where we have commonalities. So yeah, like, find people that are in your community, that are in your friend circle, that are in your classes. Find people that you can connect to, and try to figure out what you have more in common about and what you have differences about. You know, start adding curiosity to that.
Thank you. Naomi, do you have a closing thought?
Just deep gratitude for the opportunity to have open heart and open mind conversations with each other, and to continue that. So just a big thanks to you and your podcast.
Thank you. Do you have a couple words, Leah? I should give you one word.
Thank you so much, and hopefully the conversation will continue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. And maybe everyone tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time at w4cy.com or Talk4 TV. And may we all have enriching conversations and diversity this week. Thank you.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate